First of all, I would argue that the separation of consciousness from the human brain has been objectively proven to be possible. In my first video about life after death, I mentioned a woman who had no measurable brain activity during the time her consciousness accurately observed what had happened in the room around her. Open-minded yet skeptical scientists like Dr. Bruce Grayson have gone down the list of all the possible explanations that are acceptable to mainstream science for such situations, and all have been consequently eliminated. The only possible explanation remaining seems to be that consciousness continues after the death of the physical body. When you have enough of these experiences compiled, as some scientists have done, it is no longer anecdotal evidence. Science can be used to study these things even though individual cases are technically a sort of subjective experience. I will refer to situations where someone enters the afterlife as near-death experiences, since this is the commonly used term. Technically, they are actually death experiences when someone has proven to be physically dead during this time. There are also experiments that have been done by Gary Schwartz. He asks spirits simple yes-no questions and uses very sensitive scientific equipment to detect if there is a response. If you have a sensor that measures photons of light in complete darkness and you get spontaneous and measurable increases of light in response to a human who is asking questions, that is only evidence that something intelligent is giving you answers. Dr. Wendland and Dr. Dean Radin did an experiment with a piece of metal that has two small slits cut into it. There was light shown through the metal, so you would expect that there would only be one possible pattern of light on the other side of the metal if all the conditions were consistent. However, they determined that if people willed the light to go through only one of those slits, there was a small but measurable difference that occurred. This proves that the human will can influence the outside world to a small degree. This is referred to as psychokinesis. There is a Chinese practice called Qigong that is based on the belief that you have life energy and that you can do certain things to influence this energy. In a scientific experiment, a Qigong master was asked to influence a phosphate buffered saline. The results were that he was in fact able to reliably effect change in this substance using his will. When I say reliably, I mean that there was 10 experiments, and only twice did he fail to influence the substance. It was determined that microwave irradiation and infrared laser pulse irradiation have somewhat similar effects on this substance as Qi energy. Influencing light and matter through the human will is interesting by itself because of its huge implications, but I have a larger point that I am getting at. If it is possible for the human will to influence light, then it might also be possible for a researcher using super-sensitive light sensors to inadvertently answer his own questions. There is also the issue of quantum physics that suggests that an observer can affect measurements. By the way, I know basically nothing about quantum physics, so I can't answer any questions you have about that. Regardless, Dr. Schwartz did further tests to see if the presence of a human experimenter was significant. He used a computer to provide visual and auditory instructions to a spirit without the presence or awareness of any human experimenters. The results showed that the human experimenter's presence could not explain the increases of light after the spirit was allowed to enter. After all of this, we can now come to the conclusion that disembodied, intelligent spirits could only be what is giving answers to the questions that are asked. One could make the argument that we don't know for certain that these spirits are actually human, though. After all, it could be the case that they are the result of an intelligent something, or multiple somethings that has never been human, yet it still wants to interact with us. I put that argument out there because a response from a disembodied being does not necessarily have to come from a deceased human being. So, responses from disembodied beings may not be indisputable proof of the afterlife for humans. So we can circle back around and make the following counter-argument. If it is the case that scientific experiments show that living humans can influence light and materials with the human will independent of the physical body, it could be very well the case that our ability to influence our environment continues in a similar but somewhat different way even after the destruction of our physical bodies. Likewise, if it is possible to have intelligent and disembodied beings giving immediate answers to our questions, that proves that consciousness is not tied to a physical body. I think it is entirely possible that we may inadvertently communicate with disembodied consciousness of things that are non-human as well as human. I have no reason to believe that humans alone have consciousness or a soul that continues after death. This may be a point of contention due to some people's personal beliefs or based on specific pseudoscientific experiments. What I am referring to is the attempts made by Duncan McDougall to weigh bodies at the point of death to determine if the soul has weight. He weighed humans in this manner and dogs, since 1 out of 6 human subjects allegedly lost 21 grams upon the moment of death, and the much larger sample size of dogs did not lose any weight. Some might conclude that dogs don't have souls. I would conclude instead that flawed pseudoscientific experiments have no value. I also want to mention terminal lucidity and deathbed visions. Terminal lucidity is what we call a sudden increased clarity of thought as a person gets close to death. A deathbed vision, in comparison, may include a person who is close to death interacting and talking with a loved family member who is no longer alive. Dr. John Lerma has spent a lot of time caring for the sick and dying, and in that time he has been forced to change his view of the world. His patients started seeing things that no one else could during the very end of their lives. Because of what mainstream science has taught him, Dr. Lerma dismissed these events as just being the hallucinations of a dying mind. However, this explanation wasn't a very good one because these events didn't seem like regular hallucinations. Regular hallucinations are associated with a mental state that is confused and chaotic and is usually fever-related. Like everyone else, I've gotten sick sometimes, so I've had experience with both fever-induced hallucinations and sleep deprivation-induced hallucinations. Because of this, I can tell you from personal experience that hallucinations are completely at odds with clarity of thought. With hallucinations, it's very obvious that the world around you is starting to make less and less sense. Someone who is thinking clearly at the time of their death, yet is seeing the spirit world, is not just hallucinating for no reason then. Terminal lucidity causes people who have irreversible brain damage from things like strokes or Alzheimer's to suddenly regain the ability to carry conversations and have clear thought. Both terminal lucidity and deathbed visions go hand in hand sometimes, and are further evidence because of this that consciousness can be separated from the physical body. If your consciousness is starting to work somewhat independently from your physical body as you are dying, this would explain both deathbed visions and terminal lucidity. Unfortunately, I'm not a part of any institution, and that prevents me from accessing many scientific papers regarding terminal lucidity. However, what is clear is that there is no good explanation that mainstream science can offer for the spontaneous physical and mental improvements that may happen hours or days before a patient dies. If I understand the definition correctly, the term paranormal can be applied to anything that can't be scientifically explained. This definition would then include terminal lucidity. It's worth mentioning that once mainstream science finally accepts the paranormal explanation for previously unexplainable phenomena, it can no longer be considered to be truly paranormal, as science now has an explanation for it. Finally, I hope you find the paranormal interesting because I plan on making at least one other video about it.